tall, woodenly sad, and far up above him. "We left 9 hours ago. Did you not feel the acceleration?" Fabian shook his head. He remembered his inkpot developing an unexpected determination to jump off the edge of the table, but that hadn't lasted. He had caught it and carried on writing, quickly forgetting about it. "Have you finished?" Viablo nodded. "Just. I have a couple of things I'd like to tidy up a bit. The presentation, not the content. I am ready for him." Fabian looked glumly at the tatty notebooks he'd scrawled his history into. There was a pile of them next to his right hand, most sprouting unruly tongues of paper where he'd stuffed in supplemental notes. His presentation was awful when he used to take such care. Before all this, I thought writing forbidden histories in 20-minute bursts every day was hard. He smiled. "I had no idea." "Are you nearly done?" Fabian nodded. "A few more pages, that's all." Viablo gripped his shoulder. "I'll see you tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," said Fabian. Viablo swayed off. He had a curious, lurching walk. "Tomorrow," Fabian repeated softly to himself. "Tomorrow." His eyes ran over the lines he had written. He was deep into an analysis of the consequences of the war, and realized then that some of what he had committed to paper could possibly be construed as critical of the returned Primarch. Scratch that, he thought. It was critical. He sighed. Guilliman said he wanted the unvarnished truth, so that was what he was getting. Besides, he thought as he set his pen to the paper again, it's much too late to change it now. The pen scratched over the pages, and did so for several more hours. Fabian was the last of them to see Rabute Guilliman, leaving him fretting throughout the ship's nominal day about what the Primarch would think of his work. Eventually they came for him, and he was led through hushed halls where columns braced the deck with spreading arms like so many iron trees. The light of electro-flambeau danced from polished metal surfaces. His guide wore the uniform of the Officio Logisticarum, but he was not a man Fabian knew, and he rebuffed Fabian's attempts at conversation. A Primaris Space Marine in Ultramarine's robes took charge of him. He introduced himself as Equerry to the Imperial Regent, but though he did say his name, it fell out of Fabian's head as soon as it had been placed there. The Space Marine led him through the back corridors of the Regent's quarters. Guilliman's accommodation on the Dawn of Fire was scarcely less palatial than his buildings on Terra. Even in those narrow places, intended for menials, the walls were decorated, and every fitting was of the highest technology. The Primaris Marine walked barefoot, making hardly any noise despite his immense size. The corridors were not designed for Space Marines, and his shoulders brushed the sides. The few servants they met bowed out of the way. In a little time, the equerry opened a door that he could pass through without stooping, and they entered the Primarch's personal domain. Fabian had been in the Primarch's quarters a few times since they had come up to Fleet Primus, but he had never seen it so tidy. A transformation had come over the scriptorium. Before the departure from Terra, it had been arranged chaotically, with books in heaps left open at important pages. Now they were all stowed away, and although they were books out, they sat on lecterns, neatly, no longer disturbing the fine symmetry of the chamber. The walls and ceiling were clad in dark woods. A parquet floor covered over the decking. It was all new, but felt ancient, a venerability lent by the thousands of old tomes on the shelves. The ship itself was very old, but he didn't feel it anywhere but there, in that librarium. The Space Marine opened a pair of steel doors. Beyond them were less crowded spaces, decorated in the restrained style of Ultramar, with layouts dictated by the golden ratio, and the stone cladding the walls was pale marble. There Guilliman waited for Fabian in a massive chair, reinforced to support his and the armour of Fate's combined weight. He indicated a human-sized piece of furniture. Thankfully, this was on a platform opposite the Primarch, which allowed humans to stand at the table. Fabian hated the tall chair arrangement he'd experienced elsewhere. It diminished a man to sit like a child. "Fabian," said Guilliman, "it is good to see you. Please, take a seat." Fabian was obliged to climb a run of 3 steps to get to the platform, but it was better than the alternative. Guilliman wore an expression of open, honest interest, but Fabian became flustered, fiddling with a stack of books and dossiers of notes he had brought with him. "You have finished the task I set you? The history I require for the fleet commanders?" "Yes, my lord." Guilliman waited. Fabian said nothing. Guilliman leaned forward a little. "Please begin, Historitor." Yes. Well, the Concise history of the Great Heresy War is finished, you will be glad to hear. He put his books down. It was a large undertaking, but I am, of course, very grateful to be given this opportunity. He pushed forward the stack of notebooks that contained the manuscript. Here it is, all finished. He winced at his repetition. Finished, finished, finished. Is that all he could say? Gilliman reached over and pulled the pile towards him. Fabian felt immensely intimidated. His bladder squeezed with the unwelcome need to urinate. Gilliman rested his hand on the books, but did not open them. There was a series of popular romances published in the late 33rd millennium that proved to be surprisingly accurate, at least in parts, said Fabian. For flavour, I utilised those quite heavily, but for the style, you understand, to make it readable. History has to be accessible, doesn't it? I think so. Fabian, said Gilliman softly. My reasoning being that a lot of these people who need to read it, great lords and ladies though they are, and far above my level of intelligence and ability, and he was going pink. Well, they are all very busy, and if I made it engaging, without bending the truth, you see, so it is all true. Fabian, said Gilliman more firmly. Fabian jumped. He had forgotten the power Gilliman could put into his voice. My lord? My lord, sorry. You are babbling. Calm down. I understand this is important to you and that you are afraid, but nothing terrible is going to happen. We have left terror. Even if I find this work lacking, you will not be sent back to your old home. I will find you work with the Logos Historica Verita in a lesser capacity instead. Rest assured, you have already been useful. So please, slow down. Breathe, Fabian. Well. He took in a deep breath. Yes. Breathe. Better, said Gilliman. There was the hint of humour around his eyes. Do you want some water? Maybe some wine? No, thank you. Fabian shook his head and gulped. Better. Gilliman's armour whined softly as he lifted his hand. Then continue. As I was saying, Fabian said, deliberately now, though Emperor alone knew why he had started with the tone of his work. He had to continue, to save some face. The tone I took from the romances He realised he was gabbling again. He took a breath and slowed down. But the facts came from the primary sources, particularly from the personal notes of a man named Kirill Sinderman. Suddenly convinced that he had the name wrong, though he had read it and reread it at least 1,000 times in the last month, he dropped his bundle of notes on the table and searched through them, fumbling in his haste and taking much longer than he should have. He found it, eventually. Sinderman, he confirmed. Sinderman, as if saying it again would stop it from changing. Stay calm, said Gilliman, radiating immense calm himself. I am. You are not, said Gilliman. I knew Sinderman. He had an interesting and long life. He was a good man. Yes, quite a lot of his work bears the highest seals of the Inquisition. With good reason, said Gilliman. He wasn't going to elaborate. Gilliman drew the top notebook off the pile and flipped it open. It was a simple thing, low quality, with a card cover and stapled spine. Fabian had the best available to him, if he wanted it, but he thought that a waste. He felt more comfortable using scraps, like he had for so long. If the history were approved, it would be transcribed into a better volume to be prepared for printing and eventual dissemination. But for the moment, Gilliman was forced to hold the cardboard cover down with one mighty finger to stop it springing up. Gilliman frowned as he read the first page. He must have taken it in one draught, but he stared at the opening line a long time. I was there, the day the Emperor slew Horus. He read out the quote Fabian had chosen to open his work, slowly, giving Fabian the fear that he had displeased his lord, but the Primarch nodded approvingly. An arresting first line. Good. I thought so, said Fabian, with a touch of pride. It is from Sinderman's work. He had quite a way with words. Words were his craft, originally. Gilliman commenced turning the pages rapidly. Good. Good. This is very good, Fabian. You have not disappointed me. I have succeeded, Fabian said, fighting to stop his voice squeaking. You have. Gilliman picked up the second book and read that faster. Fabian thought he might have been able to tear through it so fast the pages would blur, had he not been held back by the clumsiness of his armour. Yes, I am satisfied. I will review all of this, make notes, and then you shall prepare it for dissemination. Fleetmaster's eyes only. They need to know what kind of war we are fighting, but no one else. He moved on to the third book. He paused before opening it and looked Fabian in the eye, something the historitor still felt physically painful. You have brought something for me. I have brought something for you. In that box, over there is a gift. Fabian headed over to another table, indicated by Gilliman. A long wooden case lay on the polished surface. He pointed at it and looked a question at the Primarch. That's the one, yes, said Gilliman. Open it. Gilliman continued to flick through the stacked piles of notebooks, digesting in moments what had taken Fabian weeks of frantic work to pen. There were two simple clasps holding the box closed. Fabian snapped both of them open and lifted the lid. A pair of golden chains held the lid in position, stopping it from dropping back to the table. Inside the box, couched in velvet, was a beautiful sword, a power sword, if the finned cooling unit near the hilt was any indication, long and straight, and worked with designs the length of the fuller. A las pistol nestled below it, snub-nosed and aggressive-looking, despite the fine etching that covered its bronzed surface. There was a belt, a holster, and a sheath in the box, along with the weapons. A cold rush of fear coursed through Fabian. Nobody had said anything about guns. He had not even considered them. Surely, he had thought, a historitor's main weapon would be a pen. He looked back at the box and understood he had made some catastrophic assumptions about his new life. Gilliman had reached the midway point of Fabian's history. He finished the book he was on and placed it neatly on the pile of the books he had already read. Sergeant Hetidor reports that you have performed excellently in his physical conditioning sessions. Your health has improved remarkably. He recommends that you begin combat training soon, before the others, in fact. Apparently, you have the knack for it. He thinks you may excel. The others, said Fabian. He was so shocked he missed the implication of his own excellence, something that would ordinarily make him proud. Combat training? Yes, Fabian. I am giving you weapons, said Gilliman slowly, and you need to be able to use them. Pick up a power sword without learning its proper use, and you'll likely cut your own leg off. He laid both armoured hands flat on the table. You really are not yourself today. This is not the most difficult of concepts to comprehend. Again, there was a little flash of humour. Fabian looked back into the box. But what need have I of a sword and a gun? His face went white. If he was expected to bear weapons, he would be expected to kill, and that meant he would also be expected to die. Gilliman pulled a face that said it all, but he said it anyway. Because I am going to war, Fabian, and you're coming with me, in case this most obvious of facts had escaped your attention. You know the customary response when a Primarch bestows a gift such as that is effusive thanks. Thank you? He managed in a small voice. That will do, said the Primarch. He got up. Come with me. Fabian followed the Primarch. Gilliman pushed open a set of beautifully inlaid wooden doors and took him through into another room that Fabian had never been in before. He gasped at what he saw. A mosaic floor radiated a starburst pattern out to a semicircular window 50 feet across. It was of a single piece of armour-glass, so flawless it appeared invisible, so the floor looked like it finished at the open void. Outside were dozens and dozens of enormous ships. Their plasma engines glowed soft blue. They were sailing above the plane of the ecliptic, and Sol shone from beneath and behind, lighting up the armada with stark yellow light. The void was black as brushed fur, the stars diamond chips. There was no sound there, only the soft rumble of the dawn of fire as it pushed on through the void. Fabian was struck by a deep sense of peacefulness and blissful solitude. Gilliman walked across to the window. The room was empty, and his heavy footsteps echoed. He turned back to Fabian, who remained in the door. Come now, Historitor. You need to observe this for your records. Fabian hurried to join him. He pulled a notepad and an ink pencil from his belt pouch. "Fleet Primus," said the Primarch. "We sail for Gathalamor to take the warp gate there. At the Makorta Sound we have had our first victory. Fleet Tertius has destroyed a large enemy force and prevented an attack into the heart of the Segmentum Solar. But there will be many battles to come, thousands of them, and if we win them all, we may not win the war." Fabian wrote all this down in cramped shorthand. "But I tell you, Fabian, though I am a relic of another age, and my brothers are all gone, though I am opposed, and the sky itself is wounded, I will fight to the last breath. I will push the enemy out of Imperium Sanctus. I will do the same to whatever lies beyond the rift, and bring order to the galaxy again. I will do all in my power to see that the Emperor's dream is not forgotten, and the nightmare that has taken its place is ended. One day, Fabian, perhaps you will write similar words to those of Sindaman. You too may pen, 'I was there,' in pride." The returned and sainted Primarch stared out over the force he had built, past the long convoys of ships arrowing towards the system's edge. "It is time I lived up to my name and became the Avenging Sun again," he said. "The Indomitus Crusade has begun." Epilogue. The Hand. Gift and a Curse. Agent of the War Master. After 3 hours, the prisoner's screams stopped. Lacrante barely noticed. The parchment weighed heavily in his hand. He reread it for the 1000th time, the terms that released him from all prior loyalties and bound him for life to the Inquisition, the blatant threats against his soul if he betrayed the Ordo. He shivered. It was cold in the Omnes Videntes. Its black metal greedily drew all heat from the air, and his breath steamed, but the document chilled him more. He supposed he should be terrified, but there was a numbness in his heart to match that troubling his limbs, and he merely felt uneasy at his change in fate. He had lost something when the Blackstone engine had released its final wave, he was certain, and he was not alone in feeling that. They had returned to Fleet Tertius different. The campaign was going well. Van Lescus had regained nearly all the Imperium's lost territory already, and many heroes had been made, but the veterans of the Blackstone battle were marked by their experience and held themselves apart. He looked around the austere room he and Chilka waited in. The whole ship resembled a prison, even those parts where men walked free.
"Home, sweet home,"
said Chilka. She grinned at him. He shifted uncomfortably. Chilka had far too many teeth. "I suppose so," he said. The inquisitorial warship would be his home until he died, and that could be soon. Lacrante rolled the parchment up and put it into its scroll case, which was by far the finest thing he had ever owned. It was apt, he thought, that his death warrant be so beautifully kept.
"How do you feel, serving the Inquisition?"
she said. "One form of service is as valid as another," he said stiffly.
"That's your priests talking," she said.
"How do you feel, serving the Inquisition?" he retorted. "You're not even human. How do your people feel about it?" He landed a harder blow than he intended. He still hadn't decoded all Chilka's alien expressions, but he could see hurt.
"We don't talk about my people,"
she said stonily. She pulled her rifle in closer. She was never without it, and he found it easy to imagine her shooting him. The atmosphere grew chillier. At least the noise from the cell had stopped. He was grateful for that. "How did he do that?" said Lacrante, searching for something to talk about that wouldn't upset the Xenos. "Come out of nowhere."
"We told you,"
Chilka said proudly. Whenever she spoke about the Inquisitor, it was with pride, like she was his mother.
"He can shroud his presence and pass unseen. Lord Rostov insists his powers are weak, but he is modest."
"He can disappear and tell a man's worth. You said he can do something else. What is it he can do?" he asked. Chilka leaned forward and grinned her hideous alien grin.
"Pray you never find out,"
she said. His eyes strayed to the cell door, and he remembered the prisoner's screams. Rostov shuddered and leaned against the corpse of the dead traitor marine for support, heedless of the slippery wetness of its peeled muscles. Touching his mind had been hard. The priest was steeped in the evil of his patrons, and no matter how pure Rostov tried to be, a little bit of the filth rubbed off every time. Antoniato moved quietly around him, the instruments of the Inquisitor's art clicking on the metal tray. They were slicked with blood, but Antoniato would see they were cleaned, ready for use again. Nausea was his companion after the interrogations. He held on to the cross holding the body of the apostle. Using his ability to touch the minds of those he tortured crippled him. To feel the pain and anguish of another being, even those so evil as to throw their lot in with demons, was spiritually and morally ruinous. But it had to be done, for only in those moments of the greatest agony did his gift work best, and his mind might steal from theirs all the secrets they sought to keep. None could resist him, not even the minds of the heretic Astartes. It was his gift, and his curse. Such secrets, so black, so grim. Antoniato touched his shoulder. "My lord," he said softly. Rostov had fallen into an embrace with the dead priest without meaning to, slumped against its oversized corpse like a child holding its father. Antoniato roused him and pulled him away. Rostov stumbled to a chair in the corner of the cell and sat heavily. His body was covered in blood, as much as his soul was drenched in the Magos's darkness. "Did you learn anything? Did you learn anything about the hand?" He nodded. "Dyer was right," said Rostov. "The hand is a man. I have seen his face. He is a human being, unenhanced." "One of theirs," said Antoniato. He knew to speak softly after Rostov had performed his joining. It was a delicate time, but his interrogation of the Inquisitor was vital to the process, for the stolen memories faded quickly. "One of ours, I think. An agent. It is hard to tell. No obvious signs of mutation. He looked well-fed, rich. I couldn't see anything else." Rostov rested his head in his hands. The skin on them was tight with drying blood. "This one only saw him at a distance." "It is something, my lord," said Antoniato. He went to a cabinet on the wall, opened it, and unspooled the hose inside. "There was one thing," said Rostov. "He was referred to as the Hand of Abaddon. That means this strategy is coordinated by the War Master himself. We were right. They do plan to plunge the galaxy into the warp." "You must tell the Primarch." "I will. But the Avenging Sun can wait," said Rostov. "I have to attend to my own soul first." Antoniato hosed blood down gurgling drains. Rostov got onto his knees, wrapped his rosary around his sticky fingers, kissed the small golden figure sat upon its throne, closed his eyes, and began to pray. That was Dawn of Fire, Avenging Sun, written by Guy Haley, read by John Banks. This recording is copyrighted to Games Workshop 2020.
Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program.